everyone. This is update for July 12th, 2023, day 504 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for July 11. So I'm gonna discuss first strategic developments, and then we're gonna switch to Ukraine and Russia and discuss the situation on battlefield there after that. So as you can see, I'm going to discuss first macroeconomy, what's going on in the world economy-wise, because that's, I would say, economy is the blood of the war. Without economy, you cannot have a military machine. So let's first look at China. There is some data that came out from China. The most I think important is that exports are, as you can see, almost in the free fall. They continue to be there, and the situation is getting worse. So the drop is negative 12.4% versus prior was 7.5. So the decline accelerating. Import is the same, right? The same trend, meaning the decline accelerating there. So this whole situation is getting worse in China, and the sort of saving grace for all of this is that trade balance is still positive for China, but it's shrinking because both export and import are shrinking. So that the absolute amount is going down. And what this really means is that this is going to hit very heavily Chinese GDP. It has to, because export and import their components of GDP, and this, since China, the manufacturing and export is significant part of the economy, so the effect has to be very high. And if we see sort of large positive GDP, that's pretty clear sign that there is a fudging going on in Chinese statistical authority. So seeing all of this, that there's kind of like real economy in China is, I wouldn't say total in free fall, but in really, really bad shape. So what Chinese government is doing, they pumping money into the economy. So this is called total social financing. So in translating it from Chinese, this means all sort of liquidity, both equity and debt financing to businesses. So as you can see, it went from 1.5 trillion to 4.2 trillion roughly, right? So they try to compensate by pumping the financing to keep the businesses afloat, essentially. And the problem is it's not resolving the problem of lack of customers. You can do financing all the way you want, but if you don't have paying customer, eventually that financing will turn into bankruptcy. And that's what is going on with China. They basically, that's what I said before, the Chinese government, Chinese leadership doesn't have idea how to move forward, how to pull economy out of this free fall. And again, as I said before, there is in parallel going. There is a real estate and generally consumer bubble popping up in China. So, so everything is in pretty much disarray in China. And as I said, the leadership there doesn't know what to do. And this is a very dangerous situation. And as I said also this before, this may push Chinese leadership to seek solution by having little successful war, or what they perceive could be little successful war, which means invasion of Taiwan. So not so much even per se because they want Taiwan, but because internal situation is has to be very bad there in China. Just these numbers you really cannot fudge. Export and import, that's like cash numbers. So, and total social financing also, I guess you can to extent, but still both numbers fairly, I would say, reliable relative to the rest Chinese statistics. So yeah, situation here is pretty bad, and with sort of worsening outlook. Let's put it this way. Now let's switch to the U.S. There was also new data coming out of from U.S. Actually, wanted to mention, if you remember, I was comparing ADP versus government-run payrolls, right? Because they basically pointing in completely opposite direction in a way which doesn't really make sense. It's, as they say, one of them has to be lying. um, which one you know, really nearly impossible to say. But what I actually did, I looked up ADP and how much of sort of payment processing they, because ADP is your salary, so it's a, you know, company using this using ADP to their software to pay the salary to their employees, or just not salary, just all sort of compensation, let's put for labor. Uh, and So ADP is largest um, payment the compensation processor in the U.S. It's paying 25 million employees, which is roughly 18% of the workforce. So the total workforce in the US plus minus 150 million. So they're paying 25 out of 150. So that's pretty representative sample. It's probably skewed towards larger companies. So basically smaller, and the smaller the company, the less sort of it's represented in ADP. But I would say it's very clear that sort of large businesses, medium to large businesses, are definitely increasing the number of employees. And so, if I contrast this to this government run number, this is some kind of sample, statistical sample, and for sure it's not 25 million people. It's much, much, much less. I don't know, whatever it is, like could be, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 people, which is definitely less representative than ADP number. So from that perspective, if you just look at from, you know, how statistically representative it is, looks like I would say I put more value in ADP numbers as opposed to government run system. But you know, at the same time, I cannot say, okay, I'm 100% certain. This is sort of, you know, if you have to choose which one, um, I would probably choose ADP as more reliable data source. Now let's keep going with the US. So there was a inflation statistic that came out of the US, which is CPI, and I'm showing here actually core, not just plain CPI, because it's actually not in a way correct way of looking. By looking just CPI, you need to look at core. And the inflation is definitely going down in the US from 5.3 to 4.8, which is a drop of 0.5%. The reason I'm sort of looking at core is because this sort of excludes volatile components such as food and energy. And you know, food and energy is definitely not going up. It's sort of flat for sure. Uh, and so, but that's not the whole of CPI, because, you know, everybody's, you know, needs to live somewhere and, you know, get the other services. So basically, this core CPI is more focusing on the services part or consumption part, and so which consumption is about 70% in the US. Well, I guess it's not correct way to say it, but what I'm trying to say is it's looking less at sort of just goods, where there is very clear there's no inflation in some of them. Some of them is actually disinflate, like, you know, actually prices start to go down. This one is more looking at the services, what's going on, what's generated by sort of internally U.S. economy, and there's still strong inflationary pressures there. The inflation is not over and it's not done in the U.S. That's what I would like to say. And as I said before, we're probably not going to see the numbers, so like 8-7% in U.S. in the near future, unless there is obviously change uh, in the monetary policy in the U.S. The result of this inflation going down, actually, first time in a while, the real earnings um, of the employees went up. Right, you can see 0.5% before. Basically, what this really means is when you work, you whatever you get paid, you can buy more with that than because in the past you would buy fewer goods and services. But this is skewed towards goods, not towards services. With services, uh, you probably still not doing that great. So basically, what this means is that U.S. is getting disinflation from Asia, basically from China and from South Korea and so on. And I'll show you the source of this improvement in CPI in the US. So this improvement is basically coming from other countries, not generated by the US internally. That's what I'm trying to say with all of that. Then, actually, in Germany, if you look here, is situation with inflation is definitely not getting better. It's kind of actually marginally worse, 6.4 versus 6.1. You know, here hard to say, but what's going on in Germany that actually inflation is going up. But let me explain why at least it's going down in the US in terms of goods, but not the services. Because and we're just going to look at South Korea as a proxy. So as you can see, export price index is down almost 15%, quite a bit, right? So that's what it is. So and that's similar situation probably with China, Taiwan, other export-oriented countries that produce goods essentially for Europe and for the U.S. or for Canada, U.S., whatever, and the world, let's say, for that matter. But those are largest markets. So as you can see, this is what the source of that CPI decline in the U.S. Decline in this export price index in South Korea, and as I said, it's a proxy for the rest of the manufacturing Asia. What's other important part here is that import price index declines even more. So what this really means is that Korea squeezes those raw material suppliers even more. So it basically cannot charge uh, higher prices when they export, let's say, to Europe and the US and Canada. So as a result, they also squeeze their own suppliers even more to keep the margin sort of steady and probably actually growing. So, so this is the situation in sort of Asia, and as you can see, if you look at what's going on in China with falling export, here the prices are falling. This whole situation in Asia is clearly not doing well. And actually, I'm going to look at Japan, which is sort of top of the food chain in Asia in terms of export and import here. And the most important for Japan is this machinery orders, right? So machine tool orders, you see that it's down almost 22%. There's slight improvement, but basically it just things sort of stable and bad, let's put this way. And actually, if we look at the core machinery orders, it's actually getting worse. So the decline is accelerating. So what this can be explained is that because you don't you export to, let's say, Europe and the US is down in terms of ready produced merchandise. then you don't need more in that, tools to produce more merchandise, and so that's why Japan is having hard time selling uh, its machinery, which is tools to produce merchandise, right? Because then that those tools go to, let's say, to South Korea, to the rest of the Asia. I mean, obviously they go to Europe and to the US, but basically the idea is there is not enough consumption at the very end, let's say in the European consumer or the US consumer. They buy less merchandise. That in turn creates less need to produce merchandise, and because you don't need as much production, then you don't buy as much tools to produce that. So this kind of like all logically flows, and there's sort of this circle that works. Also, let's actually a little bit switch to Europe. In the UK, there is first clear signs that the labor market is starting to break down. It's definitely not in bad shape, not in a free fall. It's just the first crack. So you can see that employment rate went up from 3.8 to 4%. This is, I would say, given since 2020 it's almost unheard of, because there's clearly shortages of labor everywhere, and this is a very telling trend. And in some ways, UK is kind of like a leader in terms of negative economic developments, unfortunately. Um, then oh, and then also, if you look at Italy here, industrial production is actually declining, but the trend is sort of more stabilizing. The decline is definitely decelerating. So this uh, probably may be getting towards the bottom in some way. And then actually forgot one point for PPI in Japan. So it's purchasing price index. So the again, there's disinflation, basically slow down in inflation, which again eventually it will translate in slowdown in CPI. So to the end consumer, because this is purchase price, so which means like for the businesses they pay less. Their inflation doesn't hit them as hard to basically to buy whatever resources they use, meaning the raw materials, and so they don't go up as much, and eventually they will be able to reduce the prices to the consumer. But that thing is already sort of starting, as you can see everywhere. So this is a, situation macroeconomy wise, and as I said, the most important is going back to all of this is very combustive situation in China, where there is a huge, I would say, pressure on Chinese leadership. They don't have solution in terms of ideas how to move forward. So the solution could be forced military conflict. So basically, this whole picture looks, you know, brings the world closer to the conflict. That's how I would read this situation. Now let's talk a little bit, couple more things. First, the again a little bit about China. Russian president actually is supposed to visit China in October. It's not 100% confirmed, but let's say very high, very. I would say I would be surprised if it doesn't happen. Let's put it this way. But again, as I said, it's not 100%. Then I forgot actually discussed last time in last video this news about gold back currency for the BRICS members, and India already backed out of that idea, by the way, which is very interesting because India is almost like, I would say, synonym of gold, because gold is the way to, for many people in India, is how they save and how they build capital. So it's very interesting that they decided to back out from that idea, which kind of tells that there is very heavy Chinese influence So in other words, the whole idea, if this is just you know plain currency backed by gold, there is effectively nobody has more influence essentially, right? Everybody is even because it's gold. Nobody really controls the gold. Nobody can print, can make gold. Well, you can mine it, but the mining is fairly small relative to the total stock. So it's definitely you cannot do things at will. So basically, you cannot do crazy things, and why that's what the huge advantage of gold relative to emitting debt or credit, because credited debt can be always created at will. There's always consequences of that. So people, governments try to be careful, not always. The more advanced government, the more sort of careful it is. But like Zimbabwe is example of where the government is completely not thinking. But going back to this gold currency, it from very little information that's available, doesn't look like it's actually true currency. It's sort of um, hybrid clearance, payment clearance scheme, where gold is sort of like a backup because between the car, at least that's the idea, and whether it's going to be implemented is still unclear because as we see already, one member already backed out. But and that's why I'm saying why they backed out, because not really currency, but it's more of the um, gold back, uh, as I said, payment clearance scheme, and where, for example, the gold is used basically as sort of netting mechanism and sort of guarantee mechanism in terms of payments between the currencies, and they're going to still use their own debt currencies, right? So in other words, it's not a threat the way it's being trumpeted by propaganda, uh, because it's not real currency. Basically, they're not really using um, gold as means of payment. Um, it's basically, if Russia exports to India, Russia doesn't want uh, too many rupees because there is nothing of interest in India for that amount. So the net between the amount of rupee, uh, what Russia wants to get from India, because they don't want those rupees. So the net is going to be basically cleared in gold essentially. So that's what I'm saying. It's not true. Um, it's not true money. It's just a payment system, clearing system, probably the best way to describe it. Um, so this, however, allows to for these countries who will, if they will do it, to actually establish payment system and clearance system that avoids using euros and US dollars or generally Western currencies. And that's, I guess, plus for these countries, for Russia, China, and Iran. I mean, I throw Iran there because that's part of it. Uh, Part of this sort of block, essentially, economic block and military block and cultural. That's the most important part of it. So this, if this works out, and I'm still not sure because mm, use even if gold is not used fully, but even partially, it's basically forcing honesty into the system. And I would say, the political leadership in all of these countries, they are not interested in sort of setting up on a system. So I'm very skeptical that even this um, announced clearing mechanism, it will actually gonna get implemented. But anything is possible. Continuing with this monetary topic, In Russia, the Russian parliament passed a law that's introducing CBDC or central bank digital currency in Russia. This is actually for those who think that Russian president and Russian government is conservative and upholding sort of some kind of illusionary freedom values and things like that. That's, as you can see, CBDC is clear sign that's uh, you know that it's moving more towards even tighter dictatorship than anything. And to be fair, Russian economy is totally not doing well. The inflation is clearly picking up there, um, and even it got to the there is even announcement of the Minister of Finance, Russian Minister of Finance, was saying that they are entering a sort of phase of mobilization in Russian state finances, which, using military term doesn't sound great, and it's not great, and I think every Russian will feel that that's not going to be great, which means that it's going to be extraction of more uh, economic surplus or economic value that's generated by Russian economy from real economy into the government system somehow, like through taxes. They will figure out how they're gonna do it, basically, but they definitely will that. And even how desperate Russia is for foreign currency right now is example is that the gasoline is rising very quickly in price in Russia, and the reason it's rising because Russian, business, large business, government, everything, they are more interested in selling gasoline to the world markets because it brings obviously U.S. dollars, euros, whatever, than sort of keeping internal economy well supplied, and that's actually speaks of desperation, economic desperation in the Russian sort of economy, Russian system. Now that's all for all of this sort of strategic developments. Let's switch to the military part and to the war in Ukraine. So this is there are two events that happen, and I think they highlight what I've been telling this here before many times, that both armies are essentially Soviet armies. So today there was Russian 58th, I think, army commander who was dismissed by Russian Minister of Defense and head of general staff there, and they kind of like those two people in Russia. They basically like almost like a one. They glued together. Basically, whatever happens, they will either continue going up together or continue or will go down together. Don't know what's their sort of like what sort of glues them together, but for sure they are glued together. Um, so they basically removed someone who actually was providing feedback to them, saying we need to improve. There are a lot of problems. There is not enough boots on the ground. We're getting thin. We are not good at artillery counter battery fire, and basically not complaining, but actually presenting real problems that are being faced by the Russian troops on the ground. And this army is actually this is Zaporizhya front line, which I would say for the Russian side they were doing pretty well in terms of um, you know defending against Ukrainian offensive. So they actually managed to basically turn this offensive into nothing. Um, so I think the commander was kind of felt, I would say, emboldened to complain about the problems and asking more resources so that he probably can continue withstanding Ukrainian offensive. So as a result, he was basically dismissed. Uh, And so that's one sort of point that explain that this is the whole nature of the Soviet army, where there's no feedback loop essentially, and in a plain language that really means you sort of a slave and you do what you're told and you have no say in anything, and you just need to you know, go and die, and that's all. And similar and this is in Russian army, right? And I said, and Ukrainian army is the same army, basically the Soviet army. And similar thing happened in actually. It's very interesting that they are almost coincidental. In Ukrainian army, there is a 47th brigade, which is actually was attacking this 58th army, totally unsuccessfully. Throwing people on the minefields. Like just absolutely criminal, mindless murder of people, not prepared. The offensive is terrible, terribly executed. So basically, one of the people there basically, decided to let's say quit the position, administrative position, and who was sort of, let's say, spirit of the unit, I guess. And he just decided to go down, to be the ordinary soldier on the ground as a sign of protest, and literally, so and this is one part of this sort of explaining that this is Soviet system. However, another part that shows that both countries are going towards the 1917 moments is that this Russian commander of this 58th Army, he publicly, announced why he's leaving. He publicly blamed the Russian Minister of Defense and so on. And the same happened with this person in 47th Brigade. He publicly called the leadership of this 47th Brigade as completely incompetent, which is, I could not agree more. But the whole point that this being done in public, that this is no longer sort of kept internally, that the conflict is getting outside of the system. And again, that's another sign that both countries are progressing towards the 1917 moments. There are more signs that I don't think I'm ready to discuss right now, which again confirm the move in the same direction by both countries. Now let's actually do a walk through the front line, and I will do it in a clockwise fashion as I always do, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border remains sort of stable relatively. No major sort of escalation or no expectation, I would say, or no indication of incoming major escalation. Let's put this way. That's probably the best way to describe it. Now let's jump to North Lugansk front line. Things here are basically the same without major changes. Russian attacks here. There are also attacks in this forest, and Russian sources even reported that they made some advances, captured another 500 meters in the forest here, but essentially it's just a tactical fight. This is non-consequential, let's put this way. And now let's jump to the North Donbass front line. Here, sort of situation is mirror again. Ukrainian side here is more on offensive, again all tactical. Again, Ukrainian side is reporting some 500 meters of liberated territory here, which again non-consequential, really not changing anything. Basically just the tactical fights back and forth that don't really lead to anything, and they will not be able to lead to anything. Again, this is here. There is a report of some advances around Rozdolivka area. Here so far it looks like Ukrainian troops completely stalled so far. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line, and things here is typical broken record. Russian attacks in Marinka that never end. you can Google that place looks like totally World War I essentially. It's amazing actually. And then also the same attacks here in Avdiivka salient by Russian side, but I would say it's relatively quieter. Typically there are more attacks in Pisky salient around Novomikhailivka, but uh, just sort of slower day. Let's put it this way. Again, everything is tactical. Nothing. So there's no major offensive or anything like that here. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are also tactical attempts by Ukrainian side to push forward. Here, south of Orikhiv, without essentially any meaningful success. You know, 200 meters forward or 300 meters, it really doesn't solve anything. Similar situation here around Velika Novosilka. Similar situation. Ukrainian side is trying to put pressure. Again, this offensive degenerated into basically into tactical pushes, tactical sort of fights, skirmishes, where Ukrainian side has initiative and tactically tries to advance, but um, it just road to nowhere. I would say it's road to actually eventually to disaster just because of the war of attrition. Um, so again, this is the 47th Brigade that I was discussing, and it's facing this 58th Army basically. Um, Now let's just look at the last section of the front line. Call it Kherson or Dnipro. Situation here has become quieter. Apparently, Russian side has exhausted its resources, and basically, for now, both sides kind of coexist in sort of relatively peaceful manner in terms of Ukrainian bridgeheads for now. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.